Hello everyone, and welcome to a new module of Language and Emotion at Work. Today we'll be talking about the pragmatics of emotion, and more specifically about emoticons at work. So let's start with a brief introduction then. And well, computer-mediated communication, except when, for example, now we are using a webcam or another kind of image, it's mostly disembodied for our interlocutors. That means that we cannot see the body language of the other person, the intonation, or gestures, etc., right? So, in other words, our language, our communication, when we're using a computer or a smartphone, etc., is mostly textual and based on the linguistic resources we have at hand. I don't know if you can see the joke here, but what it says is, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That means we are really disembodied, and it's only the language that makes us available for our interlocutors. And this is why, precisely, many users, all of us, use other kind of resources like typographic alteration, like writing in capitals, for example, using emoticons, or using other kinds of linguistic resources to show what we don't have because we don't have a body when we're writing online. As is well known, we are using emoticons every day. We all use them when we write a WhatsApp message, when we write an email, etc., but in informal communication. However, in this MOOC, we'll be seeing whether we can use emoticons also in more institutional contexts, more formal environments, like, for example, at university, at work, or the workplace in general. Before that, let's see a little bit of a historical background and where emoticons were created and when. So the first emoticon appeared back in 1982, far from new, and it was created by Scott Fahlman, a computer professor at Carnegie Mellon University. The term emoticon is a blending of the terms emotion plus icon. However, emoticons do not only serve to express emotion, but they serve other functions as well. Let's see what functions emoticons can perform in the next slide. So, for example, we can use them to reinforce our emotion in a message. For instance, when we compliment another workmate by saying something like, good job, and then we add an emoticon to reinforce that positive emotion, or something like, thank you, thanks for replying so fast, and that emoticon can reinforce our positive emotion towards the action of the addressee. We can also color with emotion a neutral statement. Compare, for example, when you write something like going home, getting home, etc., which is more neutral, versus something like getting home plus a smiley emoticon, where we're showing the positive emotions of the speaker, of the writer here. Another important function emoticons can perform is as politeness markers. What's the meaning of that? Well, that means that we can mitigate the imposition towards our interlocutor. For example, if we're criticizing softly, like saying this is just a suggestion, that implies that we probably didn't really like the previous idea. So by adding that little wink, we're simply mitigating that possible threat towards the face of the interlocutor. And finally, we can also use them to mark the real illocutionary force of the message, that is, the real communicative content of the message. For example, when we are using irony. Think about the following example here. Lovely department meeting yesterday. Without the emoticon might be considered as a real compliment to the department meeting or a comment, a positive evaluation. But by adding that wink, we are telling our interlocutor that it was just the opposite and far from lovely. So, the question that this raises is, can we really use emoticons in computer-mediated communication at work, for example, in professional emails, forums, etc.? To answer this question, an academic corpus, an academic forum for university students, coordinated by the teacher, so it wasn't informal, and work emails were analyzed. And this is the result. As we can see here, smileys were the most frequently used emoticons, right? Far from unexpected, and they were most frequent in the work emails, right? Whereas other emoticons, like winks, were not very commonly used, and they were more used by the students, probably because of the age difference as well. Sad face occurred very, very rarely, and other emoticons like emojis or the tongue out, etc., were mostly used by a student. But as we can see, they are far from varied in comparison with informal communication, where we have lots of different emojis, icons, etc. So can we then use emoticons to incorporate an institutional work? Well, we have seen they are less frequent and less varied too in professional discourse than in informal discourse, but still they can be used to perform very important functions. So we can use them, as we said before, to reinforce positive emotions towards the addressee and their work or their actions, like wishful thinking or wishes, like have a nice weekend. It's very common too with thank yous, with greetings, with have a lovely weekend as here, or compliments like good job. We can also use them, as we also mentioned before, to mitigate requests or criticism especially, right? So that the addressee doesn't feel very imposed or threatened. For example, can you please send it back whenever possible? So that we are mitigating the force of the request by the use of the emoticon, and the addressee will not feel so forced to send it or will not feel so imposed upon. Or again, this is just a suggestion with the wink. It's quite interesting to see that this example happens different times. Every time someone says it's just a suggestion, they accompany it with a little wink or a smiley face to mitigate the possible disagreement with the interlocutor who might feel offended. And finally, we can also use them to reinforce the real communicative intention of the speaker, what we call the illocutionary force in pragmatics. For example, as we said before, when expressing irony. So this example that we have already seen before, and a new one like, yes, send it to me, I am as free as a bird today as usual, which means just the opposite, implying that she's very busy, as she always is, right? So what's our summary and conclusions then? Well, we have seen how we can use emoticons, in fact, in institutional language, and to do that, we analyzed a corpus of academic forums and a data set of work emails. And the results show that emoticons are less frequent in professional settings than in informal ones, but far from unused. In fact, they're becoming more and more frequent. I have observed that in more recent works. And I think that if carefully and correctly used, they can be in fact very helpful to carry out these important functions, among others, and reinforce our message. So this is a summary of the different functions that can be performed and that we have seen before. There are others, right? But they're beyond the scope of this MOOC. And we can reinforce this positive emotion towards the addressee. We can reinforce politeness and mitigate our request or criticism. And we can also reinforce the real communicative message, which is, for example, when we are being ironic. Now, I just need to say thank you very much and ask you, what kind of function do you think the emoticon is performing here? And, well, it's in fact reinforcing my positive emotions towards the addressee, that's you. And now, finally, please go to the quiz now. Thank you.